Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 789. I'm Jon Quigley, your host. As a coach and mentor, I often observe meetings and events so I can debrief with the person or persons I'm coaching with afterward and provide them with a different perspective. Pretty common approach. I was involved in observing a planning session in which a stakeholder stated, quote, "Combine these two items, they're similar, and only count it as one toward your capacity," end quote. What? We also have a visit from Jon M Quigley and his Alpha and Omega product development column. Jon and I talk about including technical people in sales and estimates. Not just a nice to have, but an incredibly important requirement. Hey, before we dive in, Jeremy Willets and I have written Mastering Work Intake from Chaos to Predictable Delivery, which will be released January 9th. This podcast is being released on January 7th, in 2 days. Regardless of whether you're creating or enhancing or maintaining software products, work intake is a challenge you deal with constantly. Doing the right work at the right time can make or break your project. And there are surprisingly few resources to show you how to manage this process effectively. You need to know what your team is executing, what work is next, and the skill sets required to do the work. Mastering Work Intake from Chaos to Predictable Delivery focuses on the full pipeline that work follows as it enters and exits your organization, including the different types of work that enter at different levels and different times. Must read for Agile coaches, Scrum Master, product owners, project and portfolio managers, heck, even team members, anyone who touches work. Link in the show notes to order a copy if you're listening to this after January 9th, or to pre-order it if you're listening in the next couple of days, both at JRoss and at Amazon. We look forward to hearing your comments, seeing your reviews, having the conversation about work intake that so many people just want to hold their hands over their eyes and say, it just happens. It's magic. Well, magic doesn't count. The essay for this week. I remember a television show from my distant past. Kids say the darndest things. In the version of the show I first remember, and there were multiple versions, Art Linkletter would ask children questions about life, which they would answer. The children would often say what was on their minds without a filter. It was amusing. As a coach and mentor, I often observe meetings and events so I can debrief with the people I'm coaching afterwards. I provide them with a different perspective. I was involved in observing a planning session in which a stakeholder stated, "Combine these two items, they're similar, and only count it as one toward your capacity." Yeah, what? It was 4 a.m. in my time zone. I was concerned I had misheard. Subsequent actions by the team proved I had heard correctly. Kids don't have a monopoly on saying the darndest things, but when adults say it, the outcome is not always amusing. The request to combine two pieces of work because they were similar sounds innocuous. Heck, you might argue that fudging the capacity limit of the team's work entry process by one item might not be too horrible. However, the combined action opens up a can of worms. Big, fat, squishy worms. The first of the worms is a potential loss of nuance that each piece of work might require to deliver maximum value. Once upon a time, I combined two requests for report changes because I thought it would be more efficient. I didn't do it to duck a WIP limit or a capacity limit. I did the work, tested it, got signed off, popped it into production. Booyah! 2 birds with 1 stone. Over time, I learned that while both requesters were happy getting something, neither was quite happy with the compromises I'd made to get both done at once. The second worm is increased complexity. Size and complexity are intertwined. Combining similar requests creates a piece of work that is bigger than either would be individually. Even if the solution is no more difficult, there are more variables to consider. different slices of data, and more tests required. Putting two pieces of work together increases the cognitive load on the person doing the work. Maybe a little, maybe a lot, maybe just enough to cause a mistake. A mistake means rework, which will wipe all the efficiency away. A third worm is the possibility of reduced solution flexibility. Going back to my foray into combining two report requests, when I reflected on why both my requesters weren't thrilled, I realized I had made a compromise in my design choice. To solve both problems, I had made a choice that left both requesters with fewer choices available to them to configure the report. While it worked and delivered value, I had not delivered joy. The fourth and squishiest, think all caps here, worm, maybe even a poisonous snake, is the impact on the ethics of the team. The stakeholder was directly asking the team to violate the team's practice and then to lie about it. A team that can be pressured into abandoning good practices, whether a stakeholder, a manager, a director, a CEO, has got a problem. That erodes trust between people. It erodes trust between the team and everyone else because they all know they're liars. Also, since all of this happened in front of other stakeholders and their product owner, I bet that request will be made again and again and again and again. If you think this scenario was a freak occurrence, a little later in the week, a colleague told me that they had heard a product manager suggest that a team member Lego a few items together with an item the team had committed to accomplishing during the current iteration. A very similar situation. Messing up work intake can have ramifications that range from poor quality to ethical lapses. As leaders, it's on us to fix the problem and then to make sure it stays fixed. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Remember, Jeremy Willets and I have written Mastering Work Intake from Chaos to Predictable Delivery, which directly addresses these types of scenarios and gives you fodder to have the conversation and then to constructively address them. Links in the show notes. Jon M Quigley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Always a pleasure to be here, Tom. I really enjoy our chats.
Jon, sometimes salesmen go out in the wild all by themselves without sales engineers, without support from technology, and promise people something. What's the outcome in general? What's the outcome?
In general. Let's see if I can think about the aggregate of my experiences.
And by the way,
in this
remember,
situation.
This is a business-safe podcast.
Okay, so the language needs to be edited a little bit. And I especially probably don't need to pop off because I don't want to violate the band on the amplitude. It's not going to end well. In my experience, it seldom ends well, but that's not necessarily bad, I don't think.
It's not necessarily bad that it doesn't end well?
It depends on the magnitude of bad. And if you wake up and smell the coffee somewhere kind of early on that, okay, this is wrong, but I can fix this.
But Jon, I promised the customer, it's written in the contract.
Then you are not on a good path. And it's going to be not fun. And you're probably going to be hounded by people for you being late all the time when they had no idea what on time would look like, which is really kind of bugs me. You know, somebody wants to tell personally when I'm told how long something's going to be, how long a trip's going to be, and I think they have no idea. I may defer to them if I have no idea. But along the way, I'm going to be taking measurements and I'm going to find out, you know what? It's not going to get us to Myrtle Beach in an hour. It's actually more like 4 or even greater from here. Even if I looked at the map and came to the conclusion right off the bat, I'm like, okay, maybe you know something I don't like. There's a wormhole somewhere between here and Myrtle Beach, and we just pop out. Wow, 30 minutes later that we're there. But when you have made an estimate and you're holding everybody to it, and it's clearly apparent that that the estimate was somebody reached up in what we used to call the V1 pool and grabbed it out of a physical orifice and said, there is how long it's going to take. And they want to hold you accountable for it. I don't think that's good for the team. I don't think it helps anybody.
How can somebody promise something that they don't know how to do without the involvement of the people who actually know how to do it?
That's a good question. And I think you can kind of mitigate this a little bit if the person making the estimates has an understanding of all the things that are required, at least at a high level, to do this thing that they're quoting for the customer. For example, if I know that I'm going to be writing software for multiple units and I know I'm going to have to test it and I know I'm going to have to design it and design review with the customer and then tweak the design because it's not going to be perfect in the first paper incarnation. Be foolish to think it would be. And you might start asking, then that salesperson might be starting to ask some other questions about, okay, so it's the scope of this, even in the smallest sense, might be bigger than I think. So maybe I err on the side of caution, or maybe I actually go talk to those people who actually do the work.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to happen though for some reason.
Yeah, it's funny. A few months ago, I interviewed someone who actually has a business and training sales engineers and is a sales engineer. And having played that role in some organizations, it is beyond me why that isn't just sort of just sort of built in that when it gets time to start talking about what it's going to take and what it actually is going to mean, that you have someone there who has at least technical expertise. I mean, and I'd really like to go talk to the team that's actually going to do it. But if I can't do that, then a sales engineer probably rotates maybe back into the team that's going to do it. Now, maybe, and I've run into this, and maybe I'll get your impression on this. I've run into salespeople that tell me, well, I'm not telling you how long it'll take. I'm just telling you what they're willing to pay for it. So is that more acceptable?
I don't know. Maybe you should think about turning away that project, especially if you have multiple projects, because that thing is going to represent an opportunity cost. As in, while you're working on this, you're not going to be able to do something else, or it's going to cost you time to work on something else that might be bringing in a better revenue stream. Then you have to think about things like, is the intention of the organization to actually make money on the effort or the product? Because some companies will build a product and they make all their money on the product. Some companies are custom builders. They're going to make money on the product and the material cost, and they'll make some money on the hourly to actually do the thing. It's going to kind of depend on what your business model is. And we have to remember that estimates are, they're guesses, unless it's an absolute replica of something you've already done, in which case, why are you doing it over again? There's a certain amount of risk in them. For example, I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting with, electrical department, had all the managers for the various departments in there. There's embedded hardware, software. There was wire harness people. There were systems engineers, system engineering managers. These are all process manager, chief engineer, and all that. They're all in here, right? We're trying to estimate what it takes to do a particular project. And the system engineer, he would be the person that would lead us off, right? And so he blurts a number. And I'm thinking about that number, and I'm thinking about what I know of the scope. I'm the process manager in this case. I'm thinking about that number, and I'm thinking about what I know about the scope. And so I ask him some questions. I say, okay, so how many systems level specifications are going to have to be open, altered, reviewed, released? And he went through his head and he blurted a number, right? And then we took the number of hours he blurted and the number of specs that were required to be go through this update, review, release process. And he's like, oh, no, that number's wrong. My original estimate was wrong. I pulled from the hip and that didn't work. And that person arguably is pretty close to the actual effort to do to accomplish the task of all these system level specifications.
You lost me when you said managers doing this, because I don't buy that they're close to it. I think maybe at one point they were.
Yeah.
But I think there is a diminishing knowledge base as soon as you step away. And you have to, right? To be a manager, to do all the things that are required. One has to step away from the code phase. And as soon as you do, the technology evolves. Everything that you touch theoretically evolves. So, they're certainly closer than the salesperson.
Yes. And more to the point, when he pulled from the hip without thinking about what really was going on, his number was ridiculous. But when he was coached through, okay, how many of these things are we going to have to open up? Is there anything we have to write from scratch as a brand new? Turns out there was no brand new, but there was a lot of things that had to go be through the editing process. We had to add some things into the system levels at the system spec. And those can't be just written and then released. It's not prudent just to make changes and then say, there you go.
We can test it in production, Jon.
Yeah. That's a different kind of failure, but it leads to the same result. It's not going to be pleasant.
Especially if you're driving it. So, Jon, organizations have product organizations, and we'll push aside the distinction between projects and products and all that stuff, but they have product organizations that are trying to ride herd on sort of the evolution of the product. We have technical organizations that own and ride herd on the hardware, software configurations. Hopefully this is a value chain so that they all are pointing in the same direction. And then we have sales, who hopefully is part of this value chain. But they all three generally have different goals. And I think those goals probably force them out of alignment with each other.
I think that's probably true. And the reward mechanisms that are either formally in place or just happenstance also drive that disparity or that difference. The sales guys are often rewarded on what they kill, as an analogy, right? What I bring in and what we actually do. So their goal is to bring revenue stream into the company. It doesn't really matter if we actually make money on it, maybe. It's just a revenue input. I'm not sure those are always at the end of the day. Yeah, you got us this project and we lost, 30,000. I think they just look.
But Jon, it was your fault. You were inefficient. Why should I be penalized for your inefficiency?
Yeah. And we're back to that whole. 5 weeks is a ridiculous estimate for that particular.
We're back to really misaligned goals.
Yes.
I'm reading L. David Marquet's new book, Language is Leadership. And one of the statements that he makes, and I have no clue what chapter it's in, is that the combination of steep hierarchies and heavy goals create unethical behavior.
I'm not sure I would say create. It does allow for it to creep in, but your people are the root of your ethics, not your organization's strategies.
See, I actually think he's right, but I think people will do what they believe is the right thing. They will do what they think is the right thing for them economically. And then all sorts of, we can look at Volkswagen. We can look at, the Sacklers. We can look at, the banking industry, Wells Fargo. I mean, it goes on and on. These misaligned goals, they're misaligned. Because they're steep hierarchy, information doesn't flow up very easily, right? It has. No. Jon, we're in the hierarchy. I have to go to you. You have to go to someone else. I can't jump all the way to the top. That's not acceptable kind of behavior.
Yeah. Well, if you do it, you'll probably do it once, and then your career will be yanked back. If you ever had one.
Yanked back.
You'll be pulled down or out.
I think the outward. So all of those things contribute. How do we create scenarios where, we started with the salespeople, and again, I consider myself a salesperson. I have a small business. I have to sell to eat. So do you. So we all do it. How do we keep the goals aligned between the pieces parts?
Yeah, or at least ensure that the ethical behavior is that we have ethical behavior, which I think would help tie things up. First, I would like to lead off with, I have a friend who says that I am RAD, R-A-D. And he says that means right and dead. Because at one of the companies I worked at with this guy, I would challenge people that were way above my pay grade when bad things we were trying to march toward things that were not right. And I told him, I'd walk with him around the pond and just at the back of the place. And I'd say, tell me I'm wrong. He says, yeah, you're right. But the way what you're doing here is just killed your career. You're right and dead. So I can say that the approach where you go through the hierarchy, maybe above those that are above you, past your immediate hierarchy, it can get you some good results, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you pretty dearly, probably. So that is really not, I wouldn't think is a very good approach. When we go to set metrics up, we have to think about the whole of the value stream and not just sub-optimize the individual entities. You have to think about the whole of the path from the sales guy all the way out the manufacturing door. And your incentive structure should be associated with that as a system rather than the sales guys are compensated or part of their incentive system, incentives or metrics, how you want to call those, are associated only with the sales part, because then you get a hyper focus on that to the exclusion of all the other things that are required to be successful.
I think I agree with you. Jon, if people wanted to continue this conversation with you, discuss how to put that together, how would they go about doing that?
You can send me an email at jon.quigley@valuetransform.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Jon M Quigley, or you can follow Value Transformation on LinkedIn. Value Transformation on LinkedIn. I guess that was a little bit redundant.
In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 4 of Actionable Agile Metrics, Volume 2, Advanced Topics in Predictability. By the way, this is Part 1 of Chapter 4. Titled Process Behavior Charts is a Trojan Horse. This chapter is substantially more than a rehash of process behavior charts. The chapter corrected a misconception I've had for at least 20 years, which we'll get to in Part 2 of this reread of this chapter. We're taking 2 weeks because we're using this part, is construction of process behavior charts, XMR charts, to set up what is necessary to understand and learn from chapters 4 and 5. By the way, for correcting that misconception, thank you, Daniel Vicante. Buy a copy of Actionable Agile Metrics Volume 2, link in the show notes. Also, link in the show notes to all the previous entries in our reread of Actionable Agile Metrics Volume 2. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 790, we will feature our interview with Stefan Wolpers. Stefan and I talked about the Scrum Master role in the 21st century. It's complicated. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?